I've been so confused. I like reported you as an imposter of you once. Do you remember that? I'm
I
still
did.
embarrassed about this.
No, I liked your diligence. So what happened was I have a main channel called Meg Sullivan, which is where I cover video game news, reviews, previews, stuff like that. History and Games is actually a separate audio and video podcast. But when I first started it, I didn't have the confidence to make it its own YouTube channel. So I initially attached it to my main channel. And only about 6 months ago did I be like, you know what? I should really make this its own separate channel. Let it stand on its own 2 feet. I want it to be its own separate brand. So I did that, but it did cause initial confusion with some people. And I'm actually working on untangling the two so that History and Games
Okay.
can just really stand on its own. So that was lack of confidence on my part, because most people who follow me on the internet initially know me from my time at IGN,
Right.
which is a video game review and news site. But I wanted to be now more known for History and Games. And so it is slowly sort of building up its own separate following. So, but you're not wrong to be
I
confused.
see.
That was
I
something
see.
that confused a few people.
Yeah, and I definitely got confused in the process, and I don't remember which one I reported as an imposter.
No, it was
But
it was the yeah, it was the new History and Games one. We were like, hey, someone is stealing your stuff. And I was like, no, that's me. I'm
yeah,
stealing my stuff.
I'm, I'm sorry about it. I really was just trying to be like a good YouTube neighbor. Yeah, so you mentioned working for IGN, and I've talked to IGN a little bit, where they'll call me up to comment on some Norse video game or something.
I saw that video last night, actually. It
Oh,
was a
really?
good video.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I did a few with them. For whatever reason, I keep returning to that well. But can you talk a little bit about what you did at IGN and what you've been doing since?
Sure. So I worked at IGN initially behind the scenes as a database curator, meaning I would put in information about games, what they're about, when they're released, what their rating is, et cetera, et cetera. But over the years, it became more forward facing. I did video game reviews, previews, interviews, podcasts, things like that. So I was known for my love of role-playing games. And IGN also covers a lot of pop culture stuff. So they cover, anime and wrestling and things like that. So I'd be trotted out to cover those things as well. So I had a little mini following from that. And I worked at IGN for about 12, 13 years. And I kind of felt like I had done everything there was to do there. And so I briefly worked at Apple in their games department for a little bit. But as much as I liked the job and loved the people, the 4-hour commute got to me pretty quickly. It was a
Oh,
brutally long commute. So I worked there
yeah.
for a few months and I was like, this is not going to work, because it was unfeasible to move at the time. And they did not want people working at home, which is ironic. It was just before COVID.
Right.
So I actually left and I started doing video game consulting. So I'm a video game consultant. I will do things like mock reviews and let publishers and developers know how their game is coming along and how they should position it in the marketplace. And so in like 2019, I was, trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. And I had been doing a regular Twitch stream. And that was actually the original start of History and Games, where everybody back in 2014, 2015 wanted to be a Twitch star, right? Like there were some people who were making tons of money Twitch streaming and just screaming at their monitor for 12 hours while playing video games and just literally making millions of dollars. And everyone wanted to do that. So I also wanted to do that, but it didn't match my style to sit there and scream at a monitor for 12 hours. I
Right.
wanted to do something more productive and helpful for people. So I was looking around my room one day and you can see all the like history books and stuff in the background. And I was like, what do I do that's interesting or fun? And all I know is video games and history. And I was like, hey, what if I play video games and talk about history? Because every game, no matter how fantastic, is based on a real world culture with rich history.
Mhm.
So I started streaming games and talking about history. and then realized after 2 or 3 years that that wasn't the best platform for a history lecture. People came into my stream and wanted to talk about anything but history.
Sure.
So I started an audio podcast instead in 2019, which turned into YouTube videos. So that's sort of the long narrative arc of how history and games came to be.
I see. And what is your educational background? Is it in history? Is it in games? What?
I wish it was. I was actually sort of talked out of that by one of my siblings because my whole family loves history. And one of my siblings actually got a degree in history, couldn't find a job back in the early 2000s with it, and was like, go do business, you'll actually get a job. So my bachelor's degree is actually in business. And then I have a master's in Asian Pacific Studies, which also was supposed to be a master's in business. But I hated business so much, I quit that part of it. And I just did the Asian Pacific Studies because I love, again, history, culture, stuff like that. And then, so that was my educational background. And then I went and taught English in Japan for 6 months, which was really fun. And then I came back to the States and was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I really hate business. All I know is I love to write and play video games and read history. And then IGN had an opening for a database editor, and I applied and I got it, and I worked there for 12 years.
Okay. I see how this path was formed.
Yeah.
Although I guess I asked about the second half of the path before the first half. And you must be a pretty competent speaker of Japanese from as much as I see you use it.
So I'm rusty because I haven't had anyone to speak to in a couple of years, but I read it and listen to it regularly. It's just been a passion of mine since high school. I got in the sort of usual way a lot of people do, which is through anime and J-pop and things like that. And then it sort of evolved into loving Japanese history and architecture and art and things like that. So I'm shy about speaking it, but I can understand it pretty well.
Well, and reading it is, I mean, that's not a game for slouches, especially.
I'm not going to lie, it's hard. There's 3 alphabets to memorize. So.
Right, kanji, hiragana, and katakana, right?
Yep, that's
yeah,
right.
Yeah, that is a challenge. One of the hardest languages to learn how to write, not because of anything about the language, but just the cultural, all the history behind why it's written that way.
Yeah.
And now I think one of the coolest things you do is something that, in a sense, I've actually striven to imitate, which is these great interviews that you do. For my audience, I would especially direct them to, one recent one that you did that I thought was great was Adrienne Meyer, who wrote a book. She's been writing about this for a while, but that one book is like 25 years old, about fossils that inspired mythical creatures. Yeah,
the first Fossil Hunters. It's an awesome book, and I've gotten really lucky. You were actually my first interview that I did, and it kind of inspired me to keep doing interviews because we had so much fun and it was so informative. I was actually rewatching that interview a few days ago and I was like, man, that was just so much fun. It was so informative, and you were so kind to be on my show. So it actually gave me confidence to go forward and talk to other experts in the field, because I don't claim to be someone with a PhD. I don't like doing that. I notice some YouTubers sometimes present themselves as, super experts. Yeah. And I would rather talk to the experts. So I recently interviewed, Professor Sarah Iles Johnston about the cult of the dead in ancient Greece. And I interviewed developers. I even interviewed a wrestler once because he was in ancient Greece, but it, not to embarrass you, but it actually started with your interview because it was so much fun. And it was such a learning experience. So.
No, it doesn't. How would that embarrass me? I mean, actually, I was just thinking, well, if I was your first, you thought, well, I can't do any worse.
No, no, very well. It was a lot of fun.
It's like now I can get some really cool people on. I mean, you had Luke Ranieri. That was a good interview.
Yeah, he's a cool dude. He came on my show and taught us all how to say the names of ancient Greek and Latin characters correctly. So I quizzed him on Final Fantasy characters who sometimes have these wacky Latin names, and we were laughing about, like, one character's name was Quistis, and we were laughing. It's like, what does that even mean? So
it looks Latin-y, It's like,
exactly.
I think sometimes that's all they care about. By the way, he is coming back to the US. I think he actually may be back now. So you've got to work on him to see if you can get him to come in person, because he's a fun person to get to meet.
That'd be cool if I can lure him into the San Francisco Bay Area to do some stuff. And I mean, there's an Italian community in San Francisco, so he can run around trying to speak Latin to them, and it'll be hilarious.
Yeah, you've got to set your web out for him. He doesn't need to stick in Pennsylvania during the times that he's here waiting for his visa permissions or whatever to go back to Italy.
Right.
You would enjoy meeting him in person. But actually, so what you were saying there about getting the experts to talk about things, in a sense, we've sort of cross-pollinated here, because if I was the first interview for you, you also got me thinking, like, I should do more interviews like this, where, like, what I'm essentially trying to do is get the person who's published the work about whatever to come and talk about it instead of me just transmitting it, because I feel like it's always better to get it out of the horse's mouth, as it were.
Right.
And not pretend to be the expert on every single little thing. But when we talk about games involving some historical element, what do you like in a game set in some historical setting? Because I mean, I feel like you can easily get into kind of just the accuracy police thing, right? And you're never going to have a clean bill of health, 100% A+ from the accuracy police. But what do you like versus what you don't like in a game in a historical setting?
I'm pretty generous in the sense that these games are historical fiction. They're fiction first, right? They're fiction first before they're really history. So as long as it's not trying to be the most accurate thing possible. I mean, if you look at the Assassin's Creed series, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is one of my favorite games of all time. You can tell Ubisoft put in the work. They put in the work. I remember running around as the main character, in this case, Cassandra, around ancient Athens. I could orient myself to where things were because it's how I remember them in Athens when I visited back in like 2008, 2009. Like, I knew exactly where the Temple of Hephaestus was supposed to be. If I turned the character's camera around that way, it was exactly where it's supposed to be. There are all sorts of, they have a history mode where you can go around and they'll tell you the actual history of ancient Greece. I love that they put in the work, but I did a 3-part history and games series. That was actually my first video series for history and games, was just talking about, were there real ancient Spartan mercenaries, and were there real ancient royal Spartan mercenaries? And the answer to that is yes. So it gives me a good platform to talk about the real history, because fact is always stranger than fiction. But you can do some pretty wild, hilariously over the top stuff in Assassin's Creed, and that's okay, right? Like, there's a sort of futuristic magical element to it, but it mixes in with real history, and it's still educational. It still has value. It's not trying to be, the most accurate thing possible. It's still supposed to be fun. So even edutainment games, quote unquote, like last time we talked about being part of the Oregon Trail generation. Yeah. We grew up playing Oregon Trail, and that was an amazing game, right? Where you learned all about the Oregon Trail experience. And it was very accurate at times, but you could also do silly things like name your character Snakebite, and then they died of a snake bite. Or, we were all very immature kids, and we all named our main character Dysentery, because we were hoping they, like, as kids, we knew it had something to do with poop jokes. We didn't quite understand. Like, you grow up as an adult, and you're like, oh my God, that's awful. But as a kid, you're like, ha, ha, ha. So you can do kind of fun things there. So it doesn't have to be completely accurate. It can't totally replace a classroom. It can't totally replace professors, but at the same time, it gets you interested in history, and that's all I care about. So my challenge is to take any game from Frogger to Final Fantasy, tease out the history, and hopefully get people interested enough so that they go out and learn it.
Yeah, I like how you put that. And regarding it as historical fiction, I think is exactly right. I also agree, Ubisoft tries harder than any other group I've ever worked with in any media to get really key things right. I think you look at Assassin's Creed Valhalla versus God of War, and there's a hugely different attitude toward the source material.
I was surprised with Sony Santa Monica didn't hire you to get the runes right, because that was a missed opportunity, because it's important, right? That's a huge part of God of War Ragnarok. And, I feel like, getting those things right, or having those little Easter eggs for history nerds is important. It's still a fantastic game. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the God of War series. My latest episode is about God of War, but at the same time, it's like, if you're going to go that route, I mean, why not commit?
Well, for the record, and I'd be interested in your thoughts about this too. I think often, what is the Alexander Pope thing? A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink not, or drink deep, or taste not of the Pierian spring. Isn't that how it goes?
Something like that.
So I think very often these people have drunk shallowly of the Pierian spring. And one of the funny things I remember from talking to someone who worked on God of War was one reason I was not brought in to do the runes was because I said, well, Old Norse is done in Younger Futhark, a different runic alphabet that people used to think of the Elder Futhark. And they said, we don't want Younger Futhark because of its use by racists. I'm like,
oh no,
you don't understand. The Elder Futhark is actually the one that's used by your internet racists, but somehow they've gotten in their head that like that Younger Futhark meant something that had more associations with that, when in fact it's the opposite. Who knows? Whatever. I mean, it's interesting because it's not like you ever have those PhDs working on these things. And so it's funny the kind of misapprehensions they can get that actually steer them wrong when they're trying to be hyper right. So have you actually seen that where someone's trying to be sort of hyper correct and actually getting something wrong that they like are trying to get really right? You know what I mean? Like,
not off the top of my head. I noticed that there are some, things that they do where they're just kind of combining different parts of history. So, for example, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, one of the two kings of Sparta, Pausanias, it seems like they're sort of borrowing from his namesake, which was the nephew of King Leonidas, who was that was what my history and games was about recently, was the real ghost of Sparta. Which it can't be Kratos, he's a fictional character, but there really was a ghost of Sparta so feared by the Spartans that he was worshipped in a death cult to appease his angry ghost. And so they sort of took elements from that character and put it into this other Pausanias. And there hasn't been anything where I was like, oh, you got this completely wrong. Because again, I mean, it's a historical fiction. So there hasn't been anything where I'm like, that's completely offensive. But occasionally, like sometimes people call Apollo the sun god in video games, and technically that's, that was Helios, right? Right. Apollo is a little harder to pin down. He's a god of light and knowledge, like enlightenment, that kind of thing. So little nitpicks and quibbles here and there. But the story about Norse runes was actually really interesting. I didn't know that, so it makes sense, and it's kind of a minefield for developers. When one side of a political issue sort of claim something for themselves, and then like we don't want to touch that, we will get in trouble, and we don't want to promote it. So but if they're trying to be right, and then you're trying to explain, well, actually this is okay and this is more accurate, it's kind of difficult, a minefield.
It really can be. I mean, like I said, Ubisoft did a great job of this stuff, but even there, there could be 1,000 people working on one of these games.
We're still angry about the Library of Alexandria. Yeah. So Chav said that, and I was like, don't get me started.
Have you been on the development side of any recent games? Have you been brought in as a as a person on the production side?
Not on the production side. I've like I said, I've done video game consulting, so I'll get early builds of games and I'll give them feedback on how the game is coming along. I was brought in kind of briefly as a history consultant, someone to look up history facts and then present them in a spreadsheet and then give it to the game developers. But I was kind of expensive for that because I don't mess around. Although I don't have a doctorate or anything, I took that really, really seriously. I think they just wanted me to copy paste Wikipedia stuff, and I was like, nope, I'm gonna spend hours and hours and hours researching this. Right. So, but I briefly did that, but I haven't actually developed. I can't code. I haven't been brought into the narrative design part of it, but I haven't really pursued that. So. But I do give feedback on games like, hey, the onboarding process is a little janky, or this story element doesn't make sense, or I don't understand the user interface. So only that kind of stuff.
Sure. Would you like to design a video game? I mean, I'm sure you could make
Absolutely.
something
I've
incredible.
messed around in Unity and other stuff, and I actually wrote out like a structure for a game. It's just right now I don't have any, time, and it, takes a village. I mean, it's amazing when a single developer gets a game out, because it's a ton of work, right? Like it takes some years just to do a simple game. So I admire everyone who can work on video games like that. It takes real talent.
Yeah. And one thing I was thinking is if you were to develop something, uh, I mean, we might actually see some different historical periods. I feel like so often games kind of just keep retreading the very same time periods, right? It's like it's the ones that either have like perceptually, the coolest fighters, or just the most sources, right? So I feel like we keep getting, Greek and Norse and maybe like samurai stuff again and again. But like, I mean, would you have some other historical period that you feel like is sort of underserved?
I actually really wish that Ubisoft would make an Assassin's Creed in like Central South America with like the
Sure,
Aztecs or
yeah,
the Mayans or something. There's a lot of cultures that haven't been, a lot of it's Eurocentric, but to
yeah.
get more video games from different countries in Africa, South America, things like that, something fresh and interesting that we don't really focus on. I think Ubisoft, so they're doing a couple of different Assassin's Creed games, but having one in like China, having one, based, in, again, like Mayan or Aztec cultures or Peruvian cultures, it would just be really fun to see. It'd be different and it would be educational for everyone to sort of tell
Yeah.
that story. So,
Oh man, Assassin's Creed Tenochtitlan.
yeah, that
That
would
would
be
be,
like it's almost right there, right?
yeah. I mean, the setting would be pretty doable, right? You could definitely get that kind of effect, like where they like Origins with the pyramids, or Odyssey with ancient Greece. Like this, you could definitely put that map right there.
Yeah.
Man, that would be awesome, actually.
Yeah, I'm surprised they haven't done it yet, but they could be working on it. Or maybe someone from Ubisoft will see this and be like, hey, that's an idea.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I've got my contacts there, and you do too. So maybe.
Maybe.
Um, I mean, I guess they've done some pretty surprising ones with Far Cry too. Like Far Cry Primal, right? Was kind of
Right.
different.
Yeah.
Um, I mostly know about that because I know the birds who did the language stuff, right? Because it's like,
Ah, okay. There's the connection.
yeah, because it's Proto-Indo-European and then something else. Yeah, because even though we established it when we were talking um, on your channel a few years ago that we're about this, like almost exactly the same age,
Right.
uh, I am in fact a massively older man. Um, right? Like I've I've uh, I've aged into a greater senility than you, and been way outside of the mainstream of video games for a long time.
Right. Well, it's never too late to come back, enjoy these games for fun because, you don't have to finish them, but just sort of messing around in them is really fun, just play Civilization or play a little bit of Assassin's Creed.
What
Sometimes I go back to Assassin's Creed Odyssey and I just run around ancient Greece and get lost there because
that
it's
sounds
it's
kind
a
of
really
fun.
cool experience. Yeah.
Which one? Like if someone like me with an interest in history, not a great deal of video game background, like what would you actually recommend for me to get like my grandkids to set up on my TV? Like
Um, that's a good question. It sort of depends on the kind of gamer you're on and kind of the games that you like. So I'm sort of console agnostic. I have a PlayStation 5, I have an Xbox One, and I have a Nintendo Switch and a gaming PC. So it's sort of like what is accessible to you. So
I have none of those.
you have none of those things. Okay.
Like,
So I'm trying to think of the best point of entry. And there's no way to win because console war fanboys are going to get into it. So I'm trying to be very careful what I recommend.
sure,
But if you like sort of family friendly adventure games, Nintendo is a good way to go, right? Like, although their Nintendo Switch is getting a little old, so I think they're going to announce something new. So I'd wait on that. So it really comes down to PlayStation and Xbox, and they both have exclusives, but Xbox has a little bit of the edge because they have something called Game Pass, and it's sort of like a like subscription. You pay like $10, $15, like $15 a month, and you can play as many games as you want within that. So you get $15 a month, and then you can play new games day one, for free, because you already paid for the subscription, and you can download any game. And as long as it's on Game Pass, you don't have to pay extra. So if you're, you want to save money and you want to try out a bunch of different games kind of for free, that's the way to go.
Okay.
As far as different history games, I think, if you like strategy, if you're a thinker, you would like Civilization. If you just want to run around the world, stabbing things and sneaking around, Assassin's Creed is the way to go. I actually recommend a game called Hades. I don't know if the audience, hopefully the audience knows that one for sure. It's a really popular game. The new game Hades 2 is coming out. And it's all about trying to escape the realm of Hades over and over and over again. And at first it's hard to get out, but then every time you die and are reborn, you actually get new skills and you get new story, and it's super fun and addicting. And it dives deep into Greek myth. Like, whoever did the research for that did their work. It's really impressive how deep it is. So I actually recommend starting with that game first, is Hades.
Okay.
And it's by Supergiant Games. So that's a fun one.
That sounds neat. And having never heard of it, I have no preconceptions about it. I mean, I've heard of Civilization, and actually Ronnie Area is a huge Civilization fan.
That doesn't surprise me. He's definitely an intellectual thinker, dude. He sounds like somebody who would love history and strategy games like that. So yeah.
And the last game I ever played was Age of Mythology in like 2002.
Wow. I'm trying to remember if I played that game or not. I know it, but I'm trying to remember if I played that as well. I think I tried and I wasn't any good at it.
It was just one of those Age of Empires games, except with a little bit of extra magic, because you could call on like god powers from, the Norse, the Greek, or the Egyptian.
Right.
Pantheons.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah. And it was, it's one of those kind of like map games, right?
Right.
I guess Civilization's kind of like that. But
yeah.
Is Hades more like a first person? Like, do you experience it as the?
Nope. It's a third person game. The main character's name is Zagreus. And Zagreus was actually a real mythological character. He was basically an extension of the god Dionysus. And so the whole thing is he dies and is reborn. And that was actually part of very, very ancient Greek religion, possibly going all the way back to the Minoans. But the idea is that it's what's called a roguelite, where you try to get as far as you can in the game. And if you die, you lose everything. You have to start over. But in this case, every time you die, it's actually a good thing. It gives you more powerful skills, so you'll get further next time, and it opens up more stories, so you learn more about the world and characters, and it's really, really well written. So it's very colorful. It's a very pithy, whip smart writing, and it's really addictive gameplay. And the whole time you're learning about Greek mythology and a little bit about like the history of these gods they're chthonic gods. They were earth gods, and the rules for worshiping them were different than the Olympians. So that's actually what got me into more deep diving a side of Greek religion that isn't really covered well, which is, tomb cults and hero cults and things like that. And the rules are completely different. And if you learn about that, and then you go back and you read the Iliad and the Odyssey and Jason's adventures with the Argonauts, things that are complete gobbledygook make a lot more sense in the context of they're doing all these weird, wacky rituals to actually appease ghosts and to make sure they're not haunted for doing very unheroic things in the course of their adventures. Because Greek heroes are not heroic by the standards that we have today.
Sure.
They're very powerful and could do nice things, but a lot of the time they did very controversial bad things and had to appease a lot of angry ghosts along the way.
Right. And I mean, much like the Norse heroes, this actually sounds great, because it's taking something that's not just like, I feel like so often someone wants to do a Greek myth game or a Norse myth game and they ask the exact same questions, right? Like, what does Odin look like? What does Zeus look like? Instead of looking for something weird, you know what I mean?
Right.
But historical, that makes us sound really appealing. I'm gonna have to see if one of my grandkids will, put the, did you say the Xbox? Is that right? On top of the VCR?
Yeah. VCR, wow. And, I'm not going to lie, these things aren't cheap. So I'd have to give it some thought as to, gaming PCs are particularly expensive, but most games come out eventually on PC, and a lot of history-based games tend to come out on PC. So it's hard to ask someone like me, because I start arguing semantics with myself, like what is the best thing to recommend? But luckily, many of these games are on all platforms. They're not always exclusive. So Hades is on multiple platforms. So
Okay. So whichever one my grandkids can find at TJ
yes.
Maxx or wherever you get these things. I don't even know where you bought this stuff.
You can go right to Microsoft Store, or you can just, go and do what everyone else does. Go to Amazon. Essentially what I did. I just ordered an Xbox. So I had my parents actually, what do you want for Christmas? And I was like, is it really childish to say if you want to get me a gift to get me an Xbox? Because they're really expensive. And I just spent all my money on a PlayStation. So they actually did that. They got me an Xbox for Christmas, and I was 12 years old again. But yeah, you can just order it off of Amazon and easy peasy.
Nice. I mean, usually in my family, our Christmas gifts are like, gourds from the latest harvest or something. But
that's not a bad thing, right? It shouldn't be so material, but I am very spoiled.
I should really check out the Amazon. So, by the way, folks,
shout out to is it Stella who's talking about Hellblade?
My assistant, yeah.
Yeah, that's also a really good game.
Well, and actually, that was a question that was up here for you. And by the way, folks, don't let me hog the questions. Feel free to throw your questions into the chat. That's what we're here to do. Caleb says, I'm quite curious as to your views on the Hellblade series. I found the developer's intentions very intriguing.
Right. So if I remember correctly, it's kind of a mystery when you play Hellblade. It's a very intense visual and audio experience, and it tackles essentially the whole thing is kind of happening in the character's head a little bit. She's a trauma victim, and it's really about mental health. I didn't finish the game entirely. It came out during a busy time, but I remember really being intrigued by it, and just the approach to I think the developer is Ninja Theory, and just how they approach mental health issues. So it's really cool. You get this sort of historical, sort of Celtic flavor. It seems like historical fiction, but it's deeper than that. It's about dealing with emotional trauma. And I found it refreshing, to make it deeper than just, here's a game, go to X monster, defeat it, go to next monster, defeat it. It wants to be a little more thoughtful and deep. And that's the thing about video games, is they're not just mindless entertainment. They can be used for educational purposes. They can be used as catharsis or therapy. They can be, there's a debate, are video games art? Well, technically anything can be art. There are certain video games like, Journey and Flower and things like that, which is more of an interactive art experience than it is a deep narrative with deep gameplay. So something like Hellblade seems on the surface like it's all action based, and you're just, whacking monsters and trying to escape them, stuff like that. And, these shadowy things are happening, but it's not what you think it is. It's actually a deeper, more thoughtful experience. So I find it really interesting when developers think outside the box and do things like that.
Mm-hmm. That sounds intriguing. I mean, it seems like it's trying to, well, I mean, like you pointed out how these games can be educational, but that also sounds like it can be a unique, maybe emotional experience, like an unexpected drama.
Right. And that's the thing about video games, is they kind of have a negative reputation. They're kind of the low-hanging fruit for politicians to go after when things get, kind of messy out there in the world. But they do have a lot of, there is a lot of power of positivity with video games. It does teach people about education. Back during the Oregon Trail era, there was also, I think it was called Math Blasters, where it taught you math in a fun way. Games like, believe it or not,
like how 90s educational that title is.
Right. I mean, I actually have found, history in a series called Fire Emblem, which is, a Japanese role-playing series. And the latest game, well, actually, it's not the latest game anymore, but Fire Emblem Three Houses had gobbledygook fantasy, but it actually turns out a lot of it was based on, the backstory was based on an ancient Egyptian goddess and her whole narrative arc. So there's something in each video game that can teach us something, whether it's, you know, to be better people or to enjoy art or just to learn something, right? Or some sort of catharsis. You know, there's a lot of indie games that, you know, deal with trauma or breaking up or working together as opposed to fighting each other, right? Like there can be some wonderful things that you can find in video games, and that's important to realize.
Well, and I think, you know, there's another question which I think I'll get to here in a moment, but just as a comment on that, I think that someone, you know, of such an older generation as myself, so much older than you, born the same year as me, like I sometimes think, like I don't know, I hear about video games often, and I think of it as something like for younger people, you know, just because I grew up around, I guess, older people. And it really seems like that's not at all what they are anymore. Like maybe they were 30, 40 years ago, but it seems like now there's so much stuff designed for like any audience,
Right.
right? That it's become something a little bit more like, you know, you read novels from the 1920s and you read about how people looked at like novel reading as something kind of like, oh, you know, that's a wasteful thing that kids do, you
Right.
know, and it's like, well, that's obviously not how it is anymore. And I feel like video games have kind of gone that same arc where it's like, now it's for anyone, right? And there's a
Right.
video game for you, you know.
Sure. And it evolved that way because, you know, I mean, our generation got to see the whole evolutionary arc, right? Where it starts with things like the Atari, and now it ends with, you know, consoles that are starting to drop numbers because those numbers are getting high, right? Like there's PlayStation 5, and now there's like Xbox Series X, right? Trying to avoid a number because it's, you know, getting almost ridiculous. And we've seen that narrative arc. And so the kids, the Nintendo kids like me, who played when they were really little in the 80s, are now game developers, or they are video game consultants, or they're something like that. So a lot, they make games that they want to play. So a lot of games, that's why there's a ESRB rating, which tells you the audience that the game is geared towards. So if it has an M on the box, that means it's for a mature audience. If you have a 10-year-old and they want to play Grand Theft Auto, don't let them. That's not a game for kids. That's why that big M is there. And that actually started with a game series called Mortal Kombat, which I loved as a kid, right? And it was considered violent for the time. It's very cartoonish looking now, whereas the Mortal Kombat games are almost too visceral for me. But that started because they were controversially very, very violent. And it was the first time people realized that games are not always for kids. So there's like a whole genre that is for adults. And then there are things that are rated T for teen, and there, you know, there's a little bit of swearing, or, you know, someone comes out in a bikini and, oh no, you know, the poor children. But it's now kind of divided into, you have very, very family friendly games, which are very cute. Nintendo has that covered. So you can play a game like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which is an adventure game. It's a puzzle adventure game. And kids can play it, adults can play it. It's easy to learn, hard to master kind of thing. And then there are just things that are, you know, only for adults, or only things adults will get. So, you know, I'm trying to think of the one name of the game, but like Stardew Valley is a farming simulator game where you do farming and you talk to citizens around town and you do kind of fun stuff, but there's a lot of very sly adult references in it. Like as a kid, it will sail past you, but as an adult, you'll laugh hysterically. You're like, oh my God, that's a pop culture reference, and I love it. Like that kind of thing. So they're no longer for kids. They're, you know, they're for everyone.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess that's part of what I've slowly come to realize over the past few years, maybe.
Yeah.
Kathy asked, did you get a chance to review Kingdom Come Deliverance?
I did get a chance to review it. Someone else at IGN reviewed it. I did interview the developers though. And that was really a really interesting experience, because in Kingdom Come Deliverance, they were trying as hard as they could to be as accurate as possible. So they went all out with their research. So that's kind of an example of a development team that went in with the intention of trying to let, you know, people learn about their culture. I can't remember exactly which European country Kingdom Come Deliverance is supposed to take place in, but it was all about being very accurate to, you know, you're like a knight or a soldier in training. And then it's this whole narrative arc about real historical events, and you get to be witness to that. So you can't dramatically change anything, but you get to live that experience. So I didn't get to review it, but I did appreciate that the developer went out of their way to make it as historically accurate as they could.
I appreciate that. Well, I wanted to ask something about your creative process on YouTube. As this is a common field of endeavor that we share. How do you decide who you're going to seek out for interviews, and then how do you seek them, and then what games? How do you decide what games you're going to cover? Because I mean, I'm sure there's so many that it could be in principle kind of limitless.
Kingdom of Bohemia, that's what it was. Okay. So my process is kind of organic. I should probably be more organized, but a lot of it is sort of around either tentpole games or tentpole events. So for example, I recently did a video for Hades 2 because that game was announced. And that gave me an excuse to be like, okay, how can I cover this game? I'd already done a history and games video on the first one. Well, the new main character is called Melanoy. I'd never heard of a mythical character named Melanoy. Who the heck is Melanoy? And so I ended up researching that. And then one of the research books that I have is by Professor Sarah Iles Johnston. And I don't want to run off camera, but I have her book. I was going to promote her book for her, but I wanted to talk to an expert about that. And it's like, well, I keep coming back to this book. I'm going to try to find her website, see if she has an email, and just throw it out there. Hey, I do this video and audio podcast series. Would you like to come on? Fully expecting a no, got a yes. And she came on and we talked about Melanoy because she had covered this a little bit. Like Melanoy is an underworld goddess. She's an aspect of Persephone, the goddess Persephone. And since Sarah Iles Johnston's focus is sort of the death cults of ancient Greece and how they worship them and how they thought of ghosts and spirits and underworld gods, that's how I sort of find an expert. As I often, I've literally got hundreds of books on ancient Greece just alone. And so I will, if I come across an author, I think like, oh my gosh, it would be so great if I could get their opinion on this. Mm-hmm. What I do is I'll just take, shoot my shot, and I'll, either approach their email or their Twitter and be like, hey, I know this is very sudden, but sometimes I don't hear back from people. Sometimes I do. And I try to send links of like, here's what this is about, and here's who I've interviewed before. But really, it's just sort of a shot in the dark, and there's no super organized way that I do things. Sometimes I'll play a game and think of an idea. Other times I'll be like, hey, God of War Ragnarok is coming out. Is there a way to cover this game? Is there an interesting historical angle? So I wish I could say it was some super organized process where spreadsheets and, notes and everything. And it's literally, I'm playing a game and I get an idea and I'm like, hey, this would make a cool episode. And I will start coming up with research notes and things like that. And then if I can find someone who would also be good to interview for it, I go ahead and I ask. And again, sometimes I hear nothing back, and then sometimes they're like, I'm game, sure.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense to me. In fact, you're bolder about seeking out those interviews than I am. I tend to kind of only reach out to people that I either have a personal contact with already or like a strong mutual connection.
Right. And I think you're in the academic world too, whereas I'm not. So I kind of have nothing to lose. I'm, True. These are people I legitimately admire. Like they're my heroes because they did all this amazing research and all this history,
well, sure, that
I love and consume. So I'm like, you don't know me from Adam, or I guess you don't know me from Eve, but do you want to be on my show?
Well, I think that comes across that you, have a genuine, like fan attitude toward a lot of these researchers, and it's a cool thing for someone in that position to be like, oh, here's an appreciative audience. Like, they can look at your other interviews and know they're going to get good questions and really be able to talk about their stuff. Like I said, I particularly recommend that recent one, Audrey Meyer, and also with Luke Ranieri, who in his own way is kind of, I guess, in a similar-ish position to you, because he's also not an academic by training, but intersects with that stuff so much.
Right. And I think it's the idea of accessibility, right? Like I don't have to talk to an academic audience specifically. Like sometimes you read these, history books that are written by historians for other historians, right? And my stuff is just like for anyone who wants to learn history. So it's it goes beyond Wikipedia, right? Like I do my due diligence, but I try to present it in a fun, accessible way, because it's the idea. I really love this saying, when you really want to talk about something you love, you want other people to love it too. So the idea is to educate people in a fun way, to use the power of positivity to spread my love of video games and history at the same time. So it's supposed to be educational and valuable, but it's not supposed to be boring. It's supposed to be something that people can enjoy. And I think that's why people like your YouTube videos, because they're fun, they're interesting, they're not stuffy, they're not obtuse, they're accessible and enjoyable. So I was watching your video on I think they were called Afterwalkers, right? Like the Norse zombies. And I was like, that's a fun topic. I didn't know about them until I saw that video. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. That's exactly the kind of thing that people love to learn about, right?
Yeah, how is there not a video game about that? I mean, Vikings versus zombies, you would think that would sell like hotcakes. But... All
right, you're gonna have to pitch that to a game developer. One of us is gonna have to pitch that.
You'll probably have better luck on the pitch. Just just loop me in later.
Yeah, it would be, jump in the elevator with Phil Spencer from Xbox and be like, get one of your many studios that you bought to make this game about Norse Vikings versus zombies. Or, like ancient Eastern or like, Eastern European vampires versus Norse zombies, zombie fight.
That would be intense. But also, like, I'm pretty pumped for Assassin's Creed Tenochtitlan. So.
Yeah, I said that's got to be coming. I can't imagine someone is not working on that. I'd be so sad if they don't.
Yeah, I have no idea, but that would be fun. Stella says, hitting on a different interest you mentioned, have you read Roland Barthes' World of Wrestling?
Hold on. What is it? World of what?
Wrestling.
Oh, World of Wrestling. I haven't yet, and I should. I've been a bad wrestling fan lately. I just haven't had time. There's so much content to consume. You have WWE, you have AEW, you have New Japan. You have oh gosh, I'm blanking on the major one in Mexico right now. And then there's a couple other indie ones that are starting to stream. You have so many choices that a couple of years ago, between some of the controversial stuff that was happening in the wrestling world and just the explosion in content, I got overwhelmed and kind of had to take a break. So I'm a little bit behind on reading and watching wrestling. Although there's a new wrestling game coming out soon from AEW that I want to check out, because it's supposed to go back to the sort of more arcadey, cartoonish fun of wrestling games. So looking forward to that.
Okay, that sounds kind of fun. I something in all of this made me think of a friend has a kid who, when I'm over at their house, he often tries to get me to play this thing with him called Human Fall Down. Is that
it sounds familiar? It sounds familiar, but I can't. Human Fall Down.
And it's like they have these sort of humanoid puppet things that weirdly kind of hang in the air, and you have to figure out what buttons to push to make them walk and stuff. And Human Fall Flat.
Human Fall Flat. I don't think I know that game off the top of my head.
Okay, well, it's not like there's no historical reference to it or anything. But I was just thinking to myself, part of what can intimidate someone like me from the idea of trying a video game is like, well, I've tried this sort of thing with like a 10-year-old, and I don't know what to do with these controllers and stuff, right? The biggest controller I look at is the TV remote that I use to record Matlock every night. I don't have the powers to figure out, like A makes you jump and B makes you walk or whatever.
Yeah, that is true. It does take a while. At this point I'm coasting on muscle memory, so I can pick up a controller, whether Xbox or PlayStation, and I'll know exactly how to zoom in, what is shoot, what is walk, what is turn the camera. But luckily it's intuitive. Like the controls are meant to be intuitive for people. So after a few hours of playing, you're like, okay, I got this. And it'll go into your muscle memory, I promise. Although if you want to play a game like shout out to Diablo 4, which is right around the corner. But some things you can just literally, if you're playing on a computer, you can literally just point and click and use a few keys on your keyboard to get things done. That's also possible. That's probably the easiest way to do things. Is there's a lot of games. It might be worth looking into like a gaming PC or something like that, where you can just set the controls to something more accessible, where you can mostly use just the mouse to move, to attack things, to open treasure chests. That might be the way to go, because these buttons get more and more sophisticated. But the good news is after a few hours, it becomes second nature to you, because it's mapped out to the controller to be intuitive. So you're not constantly looking down and be like, A, no, that's not A, that's Y, X. It does take a little bit of getting used to if you're not a huge gamer, but after a while, I guarantee it'll be second nature. It will.
So I'll go from being the guy who confuses the time button on the microwave with the power level button on the microwave to being just the John Wick of gaming controllers, like just in a few hours.
Yeah,
cool.
pretty much. I mean, if it makes you feel any better, I still don't know what half the buttons on my microwave do. Like, I'm just like, whatever, just heat my burrito. I'm not asking for much.
Right. And I mean, that's a joke anyway, because I mean, I subsist on Ensure and oatmeal, right? So sometimes I have the nurses bring me some fruit.
You have to mush it up though.
Yeah.
Gotta mush it up. You don't want it caught in your dentures.
Exactly. You know how it is. Yeah, that's
I do.
Born in 1985, ladies and gentlemen. But
79 here, so I'm really geriatric. I can tell you about the ways of the ancients.
Oh well, some of my favorite people are born in 1979. That's the same generation, really. Although some people put that ex-millennial line between them, but I don't think that's exactly right.
I feel like our generation doesn't fit into any of that. We're the lost generation, the Oregon Trail generation. We don't really care about all that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, we've taken about an hour of your time. Are you okay if we have a couple more questions from the audience? Anyone
Yeah,
want to throw
absolutely.
another?
I'm in no rush to go anywhere.
Okay.
It's a lazy Sunday here.
All right. And yeah, if anyone would like to throw another question into the, oh, I see, we do have one. Tammy says, what's a good video game that doesn't have fighting or violence in it?
Oh, what an excellent question. About like 40 just came into my mind. I recommend something like Animal Crossing, which is a really cute slice of life game for the Nintendo Switch. It's really cute. You go to an animal village where you have all these anthropomorphic animals like doggies and kitties, and you build a happy home and you make neighbors, you meet the neighbors and you become friends, and you give each other presents. And it's just a very chill, sweet game where you get caught up in this fictional world where you go to an island and you fish and you make things and you just chill, right? Like that's a fun, happy type of game. There are games like Journey where, or Flower, where you literally just walk around this very artastic world. I know that as soon as I get off this Zoom meeting that I will definitely think of like 5 other ones I should have recommended. But there's a whole genre called comfort gaming that you can go and just do cute things like play around in a cat cafe or, do like farming elements and things like that. So one of my favorite games is called Rune Factory 4. It has nothing to do with factories. It's a weird misnomer. But it's just a magical world you live in where you do farming and you go adventuring and looking for treasure. And, if you want to play something that is fun or educational or soothing, I would look up comfort gaming and then just find a game that suits your need. Oh, I actually reviewed a game called Coffee Talk. And it's really, you just go to, you run a cafe and you mix drinks for people and you listen to their problems and try to figure out the best way to help them. So it's really sweet.
Wow. I mean, do you get extra points for like solving their problem well or something? Or is it
You
point-based
actually
at
do.
all?
You actually unlock the ability to get to know them even better and solve their problems. And then you sort of figure out the mystery of who the main character is. There's a really cool twist at the end of the first episode. I'm like, whoa, I did not expect that. So it is, and it's got like lo-fi music playing in the background, and it's got really soothing graphics, and it's just, there's a whole genre of chill games. Somebody mentioned Abzu, which is a really gorgeous game. Stuff like that is really fun. So there are games out there if you're just like, I don't want to play Call of Duty and shoot things all the time, and or play Mortal Kombat and have really bloody, violent games. Like there's an entire genre that's just about chilling and feeling good.
Huh. And I guess the fantasy elements in coffee talk is that people are talking at a coffee shop and not just looking at their phone.
Well, so the twist there is that they're all actually fictional races. So there's like mermaids, werewolves, vampires, but they're all really nice. And it's actually a good way to tackle difficult real world issues about like racism and homophobia and just, like religious issues and stuff like that, but through the fictional eyes of like, why can't this vampire and this werewolf be together kind of thing? And, like, you want to help this mermaid achieve her dream of becoming like a game developer or something like that. Like, it's really cute. It's a good way to talk about issues in a sort of a fun, sort of soothing environment.
And actually that brings something to mind I was curious about earlier when we were figuring out our lighting issues and such. And I said, oh, I never care what I look like on these things. And you said, well, I'll be judged no matter what. Do you feel that you have faced some challenges speaking in this space as a woman? Do you find that you have to overcome a certain prejudice from some corners of your audience to talk about these things? You don't have to talk about that if you don't want to, but
no, absolutely, it's important. It's important, and absolutely. When I worked at IGN, it was really difficult. Every time I was on camera, someone said something nasty. I wasn't pretty enough, or I clearly was only there as, I didn't really know anything about games. I was a girl gamer. I didn't really know about these games, even though I could talk circles around some of these people. I mean, ask me anything about God of War. I've been a fan from the start. I can talk about things like that. But, if I walk into, back in the day, if I walked into electronic arts electronic boutique or, GameSpot or whatever, GameStop, I'm getting everything mixed up here. I'd still get asked, oh, is this game for your boyfriend? Do you play games?
Sure. Right.
And, I still get that, sometimes on one of the YouTube comments for a particularly popular video that I did, a couple of people came in and be like, women, am I right? And I'm like, hell. So it can be difficult. It's gotten better over the years. Like it's not as bad, but it's still frustrating. I don't like to be on camera a lot. So most of my videos on my main channel, I'm not on camera. It's all video game footage because it became really difficult. It became something that absolutely wrecked my self-esteem. I was neither pretty enough or smart enough or good enough. Once I took myself off camera and you can only hear my voice, I got a lot of compliments on that, and, oh, hey, she's really knowledgeable. But there's always this prejudice of, well, girls don't know anything about video games. Well, now they develop them. Now they're the lead designers, ask Jade Raymond, about video games. She'll tell you. So it's one of those things where there's always a little bit of prejudice, but on my channel, the ones who actually subscribe or who go to my Patreon, they fully support me, and that means a lot. And that's helped tremendously over the years. Be like, hey, I can do this, and it doesn't matter what some internet troll thinks. So it's a lot better now than it used to be. But there's still definitely challenges where you just have to. It's you against the internet sometimes.
Sure. And do you have anything you would suggest to women in similar spaces? Any lessons of experience from that you?
I would say don't let the haters win. And that can be really hard, right? Like if you're getting several nasty comments several times, like sometimes people, you'll call them out on their bad behavior and they'll be like, well, grow a thicker skin. I'm like, or don't be a jerk, because it's not just you, it's literally hundreds of comments start to build up, and over the years, thousands of comments, and it can wear you down. But, I stubbornly refused to give up, and now I'm doing what I love. And the best way to get back to the, haters is to, the best revenge is success. So even though my channel is still tiny, it's slowly growing. And, I put in the work and I put in the time, and I'm not going to let haters get to me, right? Like I still have problems being on camera because of that, but I'm slowly building confidence. So like here I'm in a space that I feel comfortable in. And
Glad.
that's it. It's a good time. It's really fun. And those kind of positive experiences also help. So I would encourage women also to support other women. If you see a female developer or a reviewer or a historian, make sure to have them on your show, or make sure to interview them, or reach out and ask questions and support them, because that means a lot too. That means a ton.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, it's something I can be a little blind to, and I just in the sense that, again, I don't necessarily think about these things, and I figure because I don't deal with them the same way, right? I figure that you get into this sort of double trap sometimes where you said, like, oh, well, I get on camera and someone says I'm not pretty enough, but then there's someone who thinks you're there just because of your looks, right? So you get like this double thing where like you can never quite please the haters, as you say.
Yeah, it is. Shout out to Tammy for saying that, as a manager, she gets all this garbage that her male counterparts don't, because, it's always like sometimes it's when we have to work twice as hard to prove ourselves, right? Like we have to, dance backwards in high heels just to keep up and be as good. So it's really important to support each other.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I support your efforts there, and you have every reason to feel good about the work that you're doing and about yourself on camera. And I enjoy the stuff you're doing, and I particularly have enjoyed your interview style, and I've enjoyed having a chance to interview to be on the other interview you here today with Patreon.
I appreciate it. I wanted to thank everyone on Patreon for watching, and thank you for inviting me on, because this has been really fun. I'm enjoying myself.
Yeah, me too. I mean, like it's also nice to be able to talk about something that's a little bit different on my channel, right? Like, these are not our typical topics. Are there other questions from the audience? Anybody want to put something in here? Blake has something, it looks like. I don't want to derail the topic, but if you have time, I was wondering if you could say a bit about the process you go through when you do historical research. What sources do you start with, and et cetera?
That's a great question. So it's sort of a three-pronged approach, where if I like to first start with anything tangible. So if I have any actual books on the subject, I like to hit those first. I mean, it's very easy to want to go to Wikipedia, but as you probably know, Wikipedia can be problematic. It's where you go to find things at a glance, it's kind of your springboard to be like, okay, here's a general idea. Now I'm going to go to those sources, and then go to those sources and get those sources, right? So if you know nothing about a subject, but you're curious about it, you might go to Wikipedia to point me in a direction. Who are the famous authors that covered this? Who are the famous historians who covered this? And then you go from there. So I will usually do books, because they had to have some sort of vetting process, right? In theory, maybe not always in practice, but most do. And then I go to I call it, I don't know if this is actually how you say it. I go to JSTOR, JSTOR, for scholarly research. That's, I'm not part of the academic community, so I have to pay like $20 a month to access that. So it gets pretty expensive, but you get sort of all these different papers, and that can also point you in the direction of different things. And then I subscribe to like National Geographic History and other like history magazines, and I'll hit those up. So I try to go to sources that are reliable more than anything else. And I spend weeks and weeks researching one topic, even though the episodes are only 20, 30 minutes long. The amount of notes I have are dozens of pages long, and then I have to get it to about 5. But I spend weeks, sometimes months, researching one topic, because I'm obsessed with little details. I think that's where all the, you dig for treasure, and, those tiny details are the things that are the most interesting, I found. So I could do a basic overview, but everyone does that. Everyone hits Wikipedia, they copy paste stuff, they call it a day. It's pretty obvious. In fact, I came across a history channel where an entire episode was just them word for word reading the Wikipedia description of something for like an ancient Greek philosopher and just putting it to voice and then showing pictures. And it had thousands and thousands of views, and I was furious. Because I was like, I know, I was looking for stuff. I'd gone to that Wikipedia page at a glance. It didn't tell me a whole lot. So I went to this video thinking, well, maybe this will be a deep dive into the subject. Nope, it was just that Wikipedia page, word for word. And my head almost popped off. I was like, I know all this research, like months of research. And you went to Wikipedia, copy pasted it, and got like 30, 50,000 views. That is not fair. So it's a pretty intense process.
I don't know what magic trick some of these channels use to get attention for that kind of low effort stuff. Because I mean, I feel the same frustration because I mean, like for my topics, I'm not necessarily doing, it depends what the topic is. I don't necessarily always have to do a ton of research right here because it's like, well, I've been doing this research for 20 years or whatever, right? So it's like, it's like I've paid those dues.
Right.
It's like, but it's like, you know, damn it. This reflects a lot of work. And then you get somebody's, top 10 things you didn't know about Norse mythology. And it's all the same crap you could see on Wikipedia. And like somehow they have 20 million views on it. It's like, what happens here? I don't really understand what magic tricks some of those channels have. Maybe it's some weird charisma trick or something, or just the right marketing. I just don't know. More dramatic thumbnails, Stella suggests.
That is part of it, right? Like I noticed that when I put more effort into my thumbnails recently, my views went way up. And I was like, okay, maybe that is part of it. But it's frustrating, right? Like it should be about the content, not just like, here's this wacky and crazy thumbnail.
Yeah, maybe I need more bright colors and dudes in Viking hats or something. Maybe I should get myself out of my thumbnails. Except that Rodney Arias says that the algorithm also learns to recognize who the speaker is, and so it starts grouping things with. So who knows?
No, it's good for you to be in them because that's part of your whole thing, right? Like you're an expert, you should be in the thumbnail, right? And they often say put yourself in the thumbnail. I don't like being on the thumbnail, so I kind of avoid it. But I think in your case, as an expert, that's probably really important, right? And it's just like coming up with a good headline or and a good thumbnail, like you'll never believe this crazy thing, and then but it's so clearly clickbait, and I've had to do that a couple of times for videos, and it sometimes works, and it just feels icky. Like I just want to I just want to educate and have fun. I don't want to necessarily be like, here's the most controversial take ever.
Right. The one time that I actually did it deliberately was for a joke video where my brother was eating, this rotten fish thing that's available in Sweden. And so we had a friend of his just make this complete clickbait preview photo. It's like taste test in Sweden, and it's like an emoji barfing and stuff. But it was dripping with irony. So
yeah. And sometimes you have to be careful. I had to be careful because the last thumbnail I did for History and Games episode was about, the real ghost of Sparta, and I had a picture of Kratos. And it just said fraud. And so it got people to click. But on TikTok, where the audience was too lazy to actually go look up the video, everyone got mad and was like, you're wrong. And girls can't play games. And Kratos is a ghost of Sparta. And it said real ghost of Sparta. And it's a cute pun, people. So you sometimes have to be careful. It can backfire,
Totally. Well, because I mean, my sense of humor it works better in person probably sometimes than it does on video because I have one facial expression, right? And like I enjoy some fairly ironic kind of jokes, but if you don't know me, you don't necessarily know that it's ironic. So I've said some things that I meant 100% ironically as just asides, and people have taken them, quite seriously. So yeah, you do have to worry about these things sometimes.
Yeah, because the audience isn't in front of you, so you can't sit there and sort of explain it to you. You just have to hope for the best. So yeah, it can be tricky.
Well, and what you think is obviously a joke is not necessarily obviously a joke to somebody who's a total stranger.
Right, exactly.
And it's weird because then you also, and I'm sure you have some of this too, you wind up with people who think they know you better than they do. And can actually get like crossed signals that way and like think that what's actually more of a joke is more serious and vice versa. Anyway, it's fascinating. These are some of the challenges of our new media age.
Yeah, it is a challenge as we're all trying to figure out how to navigate it.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on how you're navigating it? That might be a nice segue toward closing. Any-
I'm doing the best I can. Let's just put it to you that way. Trying to, like, I'm learning. It's a constant learning process, right? Because the landscape is changing so fast too. 1 minute it was blogs, and then it was, Twitch streams and YouTube streams, and now it's, media stuff like TikTok. And I don't really use TikTok. I don't get it. And I've honestly tried, but it's so crazy and wacky. And if you look up history stuff on this, some of it is completely inaccurate. And I just want to yell at these kids, like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? Or they repeat basic facts that it's a little discouraging that people don't know. And in fact, a few years ago when I was working at IGN, I was probably talking about Civ 6, and I was talking about Julius Caesar, and someone unironically said, "Who's Caesar?" And I thought they were joking. So I was like, "Cesar Chavez, you know who I mean?" And they're like, "Who's that?" They didn't know who that was either. And I was like, "Okay, are you serious? Or are you deadpanning?" They did not know who Julius Caesar was. And I was like, what is going on? You need to go watch History and Games. You need to go watch anything, history, or, sometimes people are over reliant on like the History Channel, right? So like, it's like a fun thing, but it's like basic history. And it's another reference point of like, start here, then go here. This expert that you saw, if they're interviewing Bettany Hughes or Barry Strauss or somebody, like, that's a starting point. You need to actually go read their book and do the research. It should be a fun starting point. That shouldn't be the end point.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, you're right. Sometimes it can be surprising just how many of what you might think of as the basics people don't have. So sometimes you do find yourself, and I'm sure you find yourself in this position too, like explaining the most basic stuff just because there's somebody out there who doesn't know it.
Right. I'm old enough to, so Stella says, I'm old enough to remember when they had history on the History Channel. Yeah, that's right. They did. It's like MTV used to have music videos, and then somewhere along the way, like History Channel became Ice Truckers. What does that have to do with history? You lost me.
Yeah.
So yeah,
well,
it's interesting.
as we wave our canes at the sky,
yell at the clouds.
Yeah, it's a good practice for people our age. I just want to say thank you for coming on and talking to us for more than an hour today. This has been a lot of fun for me. I think it'll be a fun something different to put up on YouTube, and I hope that it helps you continue to build your channel and get more of an audience.
Yes, that would be great. And it was great talking to you, and I hope we can do this again. It's always a lot of fun. Very just sort of chill, relaxed environment.
I should get something set up, and we should, I don't know, do something collaborative with some game or another. It might be fun to try out. Like
we should play some multiplayer game where we can play and kind of laugh about the accuracy or inaccuracy of it. And
yeah, if I can, yeah, I need to get some
we'll play one
set.
of these games. We'll play something like Valhalla Ragnarok, and you can laugh at all the things they're getting wrong.
Yeah, I gotta get some things sorted out, and then yeah, like I said, maybe I'll get one of the grandkids to put that on top of the VCR.
Yep.
Then we can eat some oatmeal and work on that.
Yeah, exactly. Eat our oatmeal. Just reminisce about ye olden times.
Yeah, we'll do it after Matlock one day.
Yeah, there you go. Got to watch Matlock first. Got to make sure that we get our Matlock in.
All right. Well, Megan, thank you again so much. And everyone on Patreon, thank you for coming and for your questions. And
thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Wish our guests and everyone else all the best.